channel super fun and all about artisan cheese and more to melt your peaceful heart and toast your peaceful life. Coming to you from the Appalachian Mountains of southwestern Virginia, this is the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hey, this is Scott Hall from Peaceful Heart Farm, and you are listening to the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hello, everybody. Melanie Hall here. Hope you are doing well. The conversation today and every day revolves around the value of tradition, traditional homestead living, traditional raw milk products, and artisan cheese. Topics discussed here are designed to create new perspectives and possibilities for how you might add the taste of tradition to your life. Have you considered flavoring cheese that you've made in your home cheese-making operation? Well, likely most of you are not making your own cheese, but you'll want to seek out some flavored cheeses for a real treat. There are so many possibilities here that I couldn't possibly cover them all in this short podcast. So today, I'll give you just a brief overview of what you might consider in tasting and in creating your own cheeses. And a big welcome to new listeners, and welcome back to the veteran homestead-loving regulars who stop by the FarmCast for every episode. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to start off with what's going on at the homestead, and then I'll get right into talking about some tasty cheese. First of all, I want to start off talking about our herd share program. We're opening up our raw milk cheese herd shares to more people. One full share will provide you and your family with about 2 pounds of our handmade aged raw milk cheese per month. A half a share will provide about 1 pound of cheese per month. And we have 4 varieties of cheese from which to choose. Our Peaceful Heart Gold is a Danish Havarti-style cheese. It is a washed curd cheese. It's soft, buttery, and the sweetest cheese we make. Moving from the mildest to the sharpest, the next in line is our Ararat Legend. This is also a washed rind cheese, which makes it a little bit sweeter. It's made in the Dutch Gouda tradition. It's a firmer cheese than the Gold with nearly as much butter flavor. This cheese ages well and the flavor deepens with each passing month. The next two kind of tie for sharpest depending on how long they have aged. We have a wonderful aged cheddar and an Alpine-style cheese we call Pinnacle. The flavor complexities of these two cheeses are amazing, as neither is even ready to taste until 9 months or more of aging. Well, we do offer the milder cheddar at 3 and 6 months, but you'll definitely want to wait for the good stuff. Details and costs on our herd share program can be found on our website at peacefulheartfarm.com. That's peacefulheartfarm.com. Product pickup is available at the Withville Farmers Market, the Independence Farmers Market, and from our homestead. So support us or some other local farm and keep good food alive. Give us a call and we can get you set up. All right, the cows. We are on calf watch with Rosie. This event is happening far ahead of our expectations. Her udder is developing and filling with milk. It may be only a matter of days. We were expecting more than a month. Anyway, you never really know any more than you know for humans when the exact date will be for the event. She's looking good, and Scott and I are feeling pretty good about her and her calf. We're still cautious and watching her very closely, but again, Rosie looks really good right now. Buttercup is doing a good job of keeping her company. She is our only cow that is not going to have a calf this year. After Rosie, next up for giving birth is Cloud, followed closely by Claire within just a few days. And Butter and Violet are much further down the line. They're due in May and June, respectively. And as I said, Buttercup's not having a calf this year. If all goes well, we will end up with 5 calves this year, praying for some heifers. And praying for Rosie right now. The goats and sheep are doing well. The sheep. I'm going to talk about the goats and sheep. Sorry. The sheep are doing well. Their expected delivery date is the 27th of March, so about a month more for them. And we will likely have 6 to 8 lambs this year. And if all goes as it did last year, they will all be healthy lambs. For the first time in our homesteading history, last year we did not lose one single lamb. We still have all 9 of them. Now, the goats are a different story. They have been reduced to 5. Yes, I finally got moving on reducing our goat population. We are moving more rapidly toward changing over to meat goats. If you're new, we currently have Cashmere goats. I had this grandiose idea that I was going to have some time to gather their cashmere every spring and have it made into yarn, and then I'd have time to knit up some wonderful cashmere items. It took a few years for me to realize that I was not going to have time to include yet another enterprise into our business model. Well, by that time, we had well over 20 goats. And these goats are wonderful animals. They're great at keeping the pastures clear of brush, briars, and small pine trees. So we definitely want to keep a few of them around. However, it makes much more sense for our homestead to have meat goats. It's something that we would actually use as we're breeding these animals, rather than just letting, right now, what happens is all that cashmere just goes to waste out in the field. So a better use of our time, energy, and money is to have meat goats. That way they can keep the pastures pristine and also provide nourishment for our family. Later this fall, we're going to process the final 5 goats, and at that point, we will be in the market for a small herd of meat goats. Right now, I'm focused on Kiko goats, but would probably consider Spanish goats. Both of these are under consideration because of their parasite resistance and the lack of need for hoof care. Hoof care of these goats is time-consuming, or can be time-consuming. Just working it in, even if it's only an hour or 2 at a time, it's tough to work these things in sometimes. So I'd rather go with something that saves me that hour or 2. So we're looking at the Kiko goats, possibly Spanish goats. Now the quail, a few days ago, Scott and I went over the costs of raising these great birds. You know I love my quail. I talk about them all the time. But according to my year-end report, it's pretty expensive to raise them. And so my first knee-jerk reaction was to just stop raising quail. However, after waiting a couple days, letting it cool down, I decided to break down the actual cost and how much we are benefiting from the eggs and meat, because there's a lot of cost going into it, but we are eating the eggs and we are eating the meat, and we do sell some of those as well. So back in 2006, Scott raised just sort of 150 chickens in the Joel Salatin type chicken tractors. And he calculated that it cost a little over $1 per pound to raise those chickens. Now, granted, that was 2006, so maybe it's $2 or even $3 a pound to raise chickens. Our cost to raise quail is somewhere between $5.50 and $6.50 per pound of bird. That's a significant amount more of cost per bird, almost double, pretty much double the cost, at least, to raise these quail. However, there are also the eggs to consider, and Scott and I sat down and we tried to come up with a better comparison. If we had to buy eggs, what would be our cost? And subtract that from the total cost based on 4 quail eggs per 1 chicken egg, because I can't estimate the cost of quail eggs. I have to go with what does it cost to buy chicken eggs. And then the rest of the cost, that would be divided by the approximate weight of the birds raised for meat. Anyway, the bottom line is that we decided to give the quail one more season to prove their worth. I also decided to feed them a little bit less. They did seem to be putting on quite a bit of unnecessary fat, so this seemed the first place to cut a little cost. We shall see what happens this year. I'm going to keep better records, and I'm still anticipating when we'll be able to build our chicken facilities. It won't be this year. The quail get a well-deserved reprieve. But there is a reason that exotic birds are not raised in the same way that chickens are. Chickens are easy. Chickens are cheap. Not cheap, but less expensive, let's say, than raising quail or pheasant or something like that. So that just became really apparent to us. But still, if there's a benefit or if we can break even on it, we're going to keep going because I love the quail. I do. Now let me talk about the garden. Yes, the garden. I just received a couple of rolls of woven fabric ground cloth. Yes, we are about to get started on the garden using this ground cloth that we started with last year. It is wonderful. It keeps the weeds down so great. It's just so easy to take care of the garden using this woven fabric, and it keeps the ground cool or warm depending on what is needed. The water goes through the woven fabric, and it's just an all-around good way to go. So the biggest change this year as far as working in our gardens is the strawberry bed. I've ordered 500 bare root strawberry plants. Yes, you heard that right. I ordered 500 plants. We are pretty much starting from scratch with our strawberries, and I've got this 70-foot strip, probably about 4 foot, maybe 5 or 6 feet. I don't know. Scott would know, but it's a very large patch that is going to have strawberries in it. And I'm also probably going to plant some of my perennial herbs between sections. So I'll section it off, have a few strawberries, have a perennial herb, more strawberries, another perennial herb. Scott suggested this, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful idea. So this is like this is our big garden project for this year. And I'm really excited about this new opportunity. Now, I am also going to start some plants for sale at the farmer's market. If you're in my neighborhood, I should have some herbs, some tomatoes, and perhaps some green pepper starch ready for your garden, probably around May when the summer market opens up. Personally, I'm not going to grow very many tomatoes or peppers this year, but I really love growing plants. So growing for you guys seemed to be the best way to fulfill that desire to grow stuff. And I chose to grow some culinary herbs because they are sometimes harder to find for your annual herb gardens. I know you've probably got your perennial herbs, like I was just talking about, gonna be in my strawberry patch. But those annual herbs like cilantro, basil, parsley. I've got another one I can't remember right offhand, but all of those have to be planted every year. So I'll keep you posted on which herbs that I was successful in sprouting, and I'll have those at the farmer's market for those of you who are in my local area. So I'm excited about, as the winter wears on, you just get so excited about being able to start growing stuff again. The rest of the garden, the balance of the garden, I'm going to focus on green beans and peas, both green peas and also the cow peas, or what are they called? Crowder peas, that we love so much. So most of the garden is going to be taken up with those things. And I'll have those also at the farmer's market, the green beans, the green peas. I'll have some snap peas as well as some shelling peas, hopefully fairly early in the spring. All right, let's talk about flavoring cheese. If you're making your own cheese at home, this could be a great adventure for you. And on the other hand, if you're just a real cheesehead and love to try new cheeses, you might take a look at some of the cheese available that have either had spices or seeds added, and maybe they have herbs added, and some have been created using ale, wine, and or spirits. So these are some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. You may even be able to find a cheese that's wrapped in leaves. These are just a few of the methods used to add various flavors to cheese. There are others, but in this short podcast, I'll briefly touch on these flavorings that I just mentioned. Again, I'm just going to stick with these for today. So we're going to talk about seeds and spices, a little bit about herbs, and then some about ale, wine, and spirits, and a little bit about wrapping with leaves. Let's start with the seeds and spices. Your first thought when considering what seeds and spices to add should be the quality. You don't want to use 3-year-old dried herbs from your cabinet. Next, think of what you like, and now temper that with the thought that sometimes there's a good reason that you haven't seen that kind of cheese made. However, don't let that thought stop you from experimenting. All right? Sometimes the choice to not have that at a market is that it's not economical to produce such a cheese on a commercial basis. That doesn't mean it's going to taste bad. So if you're making it in your own kitchen, the costs are much less of a factor. If you're concerned at all, simply start with a combination that you've already seen or tasted. For those of you that are tasting, expand your horizons a little bit. There are two things that you want to consider when preparing your experiment: getting the right distribution and the size of the seed. I've seen lots of cheeses use whole peppercorns. I've tried them. Some of them are amazing. Some of them, they had too many peppercorns in them for me personally. Peppercorns are pretty big seeds, so you would use less of those. On the other hand, if you have a small seed such as caraway, you don't want to put too many of them in there so that you ruin the texture of the cheese. For a cheese, maybe 2 gallons of milk, you are likely going to choose somewhere between 1 to 3 teaspoons of your chosen seed or spice for 2 gallons of milk. You're going to put it into the curd. One other little kind of side note here that you might want to consider as you're preparing your seeds or spices for your cheese curd, you might consider boiling them for 5 to 10 minutes. There are a couple of reasons you might want to try that: if you suspect any kind of contamination, or if you want to soften a seed so that the flavors are more readily incorporated into the cheese, then you might boil them for 5 or 10 minutes. But when you're adding your seeds or spices, there's a couple of different ways, and almost universally the whey needs to have been drained. There are a couple of different ways, and the whey, the liquid, needs to have been drained. You don't want to lose your spice with the whey. One of the easiest methods is to simply stir your seeds and or spices into the drained curds. Another fun way would be to layer it in the mold. Put a little curd in, add your spices, put a little more curd, add spices again, and so on. But you want to be careful with that method. There's always a chance that you will bunch your spices up too closely together. You're going to overspice one area. Another place would be underserved. And another consideration would be you might even have trouble getting that cheese to knit together properly if you've got too many seeds all in one place. And then your cheese is falling apart. And anyway, the trade-off is the visual effect that you have of the layers. So it's still, it's still something to consider. Me, I'm stirring mine. I'm just going to stir them in there. Now, here are some of the most popular seeds and spices that are used in this particular method of flavoring your cheese, where you're just stirring them into the curds. I've already mentioned caraway seed and peppercorns. Other seeds might be mustard, fennel, fenugreek, or cumin. Some useful spices include cloves and red pepper flakes. Again, something that's going to hold its shape. Generally, you want to stay away from using herbs for aged variety of cheeses. Like they're going to be prone to break down and change the color of your cheese, and that's not a good look. So you're not using your basil and oregano and so on, again, because those are just going to break down. It's just going to discolor your cheese. So those kind of herbs are most often used either mixed into a soft cheese or spread, or lots of times you'll see them used as a coating on the outside of a fresh, soft cheese. So a lot of your goat cheese chefs have these kinds of herb coatings on the outside, or they're stirred into the cheese. So a soft, more of a cream cheese kind of a cheese, you can use those herbs. That cheese is going to be consumed right away. Again, it's not really going to work for your aged cheeses. Now, ale, wine, and spirits. This is a great way to complement the flavor of your cheese. And beer or ale can be incorporated directly into the cheese curd in the same way that the seeds and spices were added. The wine and the spirits, on the other hand, are going to work better on the outside. All right, so your beer, you stir it into your curds. Your wine and spirits, you're going to have a washed rind cheese where you're using wine or some kind of a spirit as a rind wash. I briefly mentioned wrapping a cheese in leaves, so using alcohol to macerate the leaves, that is to soak them for a period of time prior to wrapping the cheese, is a favorite practice. I will talk about that in just a minute, but let me get back to the beer and ale. Similar to adding seeds, it happens after the whey has been drained. Again, you want that liquid to stay there on your curds. Now, when you're making the cheddar, you don't necessarily need to do it immediately after draining the cheese. You might go through the cheddaring process and then add it after you have then milled the curds, making your I mean, that's kind of up to you. You could put them into the curds or after they're milled, which there'll be larger chunks there. So anyway, otherwise you're stirring into the curds after they've been drained. You don't need much beer for any of your cheeses. I also think it would be hard to use too much, but whether you pour the whole bottle into the curds made from your 2 gallons of milk, or you only use a half a cup for your cheese and save the rest for yourself, that's up to you. I'll use a whole bottle for 15 or 20 gallons of milk. But again, I don't think you can use too much. There are several things to consider when deciding to use wine or spirits on your washed rind cheese. Because you are adding wetness to the outside of the cheese, you can be prepared for softening. Sometimes for a softer cheese, you might let it dry for 2 or 3 days. That's what I would do. Let it dry for 2 or 3 days, then begin the wash. For a harder, drier cheese such as Alpine, I can take my Alpine and immediately start washing the rind on that one. Something else to consider would be experimenting with the frequency of washing and the humidity of your aging room. So you're just keeping that in mind on the hardness of that rind. How wet is it going to be? The hardness of the rind and the texture of the cheese will also influence what your final results are going to be with the washing. Not only just softening on the outside, but the softer the rind is, that soft rind is going to absorb more of the liquid and the flavors. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, last thing, wrapping your cheese with leaves. Many cheeses utilize some type of leaf wrapping. Sometimes the leaves are dry, but more often they have been macerated in a strong alcohol such as brandy or bourbon. And this is a wide open field. Choose your favorite spirit, partner it with your favorite leaf, and let's see, here's some leaves to consider. Chestnut, maple, or grape. Now, not all leaf-wrapped cheeses use spirits. Again, similar to the herbs, you don't want them to completely disintegrate. So nettle, sycamore, or walnut, those would be good choices for wrapping a cheese without macerating it in the alcohol. All right. So that's it. That's your introduction to some of the choices that you look for. If you're just tasting cheese, look for these different kinds of cheeses at your cheese shops and at your local cheese shops. And for those of you that are making homemade cheese, I hope you'll experiment with those and let me know how that goes. Final thoughts. I hope you'll give some thought to becoming part of our herd share program. We'd love to be of service to you. Come on out to the homestead, see where it all happens, say hello to Claire and the rest of the girls, pet the donkeys. Be sure to wear rugged shoes and or boots. Animals are messy creatures, and if it has rained, oy vey, the mud. I hope I've titillated your senses a little and you're on your way to trying some new cheeses. Whether you're making it from scratch or buying it from your local market, your enjoyment is sure to be muy superb. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hop over to Apple Podcast or whatever podcast service you use. Subscribe and give me a 5-star rating and review. If you like this content and want to help out the show, the absolute best way you can do that is to share it with any family or friends who might be interested in this type of content. Let them know about Peaceful Heart FarmCast. I'm also looking at a couple of subscription ways. I belong to an online media called locals.com, where it's a subscription-based service. All of these podcasts will be available, but I'll be doing additional podcasts and things that will be behind a paywall. So $2, $3, $4, $5 a month, and you can support the farm that way. Same thing on Patreon. We also have a Patreon page if you're interested in supporting us monetarily. Not required, but some of you ask about that. But again, most of all, let your friends and family know about the Peaceful Heart FarmCast. Thank you so much for stopping by the homestead. And until next time, may God fill your life with grace and peace.